authorities in KwaZulu-Natal now start to try and rebuild infrastructure, there are huge concerns about water supplies. Often, strangely, after flooding, there are huge issues around drinking water because pipes are broken, reservoirs have been damaged. And there's general infrastructure problems, which means getting clean drinking water to people is very difficult. Benoit le Roy is the CEO of the SA Water Chamber. Benoit, good afternoon to you. When a flood on this scale, I mean, almost unprecedented, not quite. I think it's happened perhaps once in living memory. But when a flood on this scale happens, what kind of damage do we see to infrastructure supposed to deliver drinking water?
Hi, Stephen. First, our thoughts with unfortunately those who've departed us and those who are injured and those without houses. It's actually frightening. You know, we were talking a few weeks ago, not enough water, then full dams, and now water all over the place, and the Eastern Cape is still without water. So it's you know, we've got these extremes, and it's a global situation. You know, the Umgani Heights waterworks is apparently unable to deliver sufficient water. So it sounds like the bulk lines are being affected. I'm being told down the south coast also some of the bulk lines have been washed away with the bridges. So, you know, our servitudes, you know, work well when they dry and moderate rain and the likes. These bulk lines, most of them would be in concrete. So they're not that susceptible to external forces and the likes. But when a bridge goes, everything that's hanging on it, you know, also goes. And we've got all the big subsidence that we've seen, which has affected houses, taken some away. And a lot of, you know, the pipe work just can't handle that. So I think, you know, there's no news as to the extent of it, but it sounds like there's quite a few bulk lines that are affected. And a lot of the water tankers are not able, Etiquette is saying, to actually deliver water from the water tankers because some of their staff are affected and some of the areas are not accessible. I did see Gift of the Givers, though, doing a good work and managing to get to certain parts. You know, I think probably the Defence Force will be called in a bit late after the President has finished his site assessments this afternoon, and they would be able to drop off water in places. So I think we'll be able to keep that infrastructure going to an extent, but it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be uncomfortable, unfortunately, for probably a few weeks. This is not going to be fixed, you know, in a few days, unfortunately.
When you talk about bulk water supplies, just to be clear what you're talking about, I presume you're talking about very big pipes, a meter, maybe bigger in diameter. They carry a huge amount of water. They carry the water to the big cities. They carry the water to where people live, and then it gets distributed from there. Is that right?
That's correct. So from the water purification system, which is close to a dam or river, and normally several tens of kilometers through these bulk lines that are up to 3-4 meters in diameter, and then into the reservoirs, the city reservoirs and the town reservoirs, and from there gets gradually taken down, you know, to 250 millimeter, down to 4 inch, and into our houses at 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch. It's all these in inches. I'm sorry, I'm not in Paris. So it's big stuff. You don't replace it overnight. But I do know that there is, generally speaking, enough stock around in the country. So the issue will be, you know, the excavations, the backfilling, and getting access to these sites. So, you know, it's difficult work to do. And I think it'll be nice to see what sort of temporary measures, for example, the Engineering Army Corps are able to do, because they're able to sustain, you know, platoons during a war where infrastructure is being destroyed. So I think, you know, it's a mini war to an extent, and I think all our emergency services, Defence Force, will have to be called in just to stabilize it, because there's enough trauma around. And, you know, electricity, looks like they're managing to keep it going. The water, we must keep going, because the water we just can't do without. And it must be clean water too. There's obviously a lot of pollution at the moment.
I mean, when you talk about water and you talk about these big bulk supplies, massive pipes, you make the point that they're very difficult to do. I mean, we probably only have 48 hours, because the rest of today, not much rain expected. Tomorrow, not much rain expected in Durban. But Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, it seems that we're going to have more rain in that area. It gets much harder to fix it if it's raining again.
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult to do any major effective repairs until you know, the water subsides and that the area is accessible. So I don't think it's going to be accessible where there's major issues until that next cell that's moving in moves over the weekend. And I think, you know, people need to be sensible and try and store whatever they have, share with whoever they can. And, you know, I think, you know, a lot of factories have been forced to close. I think a lot will close, but they're not damaged, but there's not enough water or electricity. I think one needs to be cautious and start, taking sensitive steps, and employers also being, thoughtful enough to shut down. Maybe it is an Easter weekend. Maybe a lot of people were going to shut down, and just to pull back so we can keep essential services running over this weekend until, the relief movement can move in probably early next week.
Benoit, what's going to happen with dams? Now, we've got a lot more water in the sort of river systems than the dams are used to, maybe that the dams were designed for. I'm no physicist and I'm no expert on water, but I would like to think that all that happens is that the dam overflows. Is that all that happens? I mean, that's still quite a big thing. Do we just open sluice gates? Could there be damage to infrastructure as a result of the sheer amount of water?
It's normally both. What happens is when we start getting heavy rains in the Vaal River system, for example, a couple of months ago, based on the rainfall data and the stream flows feeding the main Vaal River system, sluice gates were opened, etc., so that the dam doesn't overflow necessarily. But also you don't want to waste water, so you want to make sure your batteries get as full as possible. Dam walls are very strong. They're very well built. I mean, Kariba wall is not safe and is still lasting, and it's far more extensive in nature of any of our dams. So I think the structures are fine. The sluice gates normally get opened to decrease, let's say, the height of the water column over the dam wall. So I don't think we're going to have a problem. The problem is downstream, where with the overflow and with all the sluice gates open to de-stress the dam wall, is we are flooding downstream. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of informal settlements and some formal with bad planning that's been built below the floodline. And those are the people who are unfortunate, and normally it's the poor people who are affected. So I think that's where people need to be, and I think they would be evacuated, at the moment, because if there is more water, that's just going to flood straight through, because the dams are full. There's no attenuation, in the dams. And on the coastal line, we don't have wetlands anymore in these areas, and they would normally be the sponges. And we've seen it in Mozambique, where they've been destroyed, you just flood everything out. And we have a lot of concrete, so the runoff is very vicious. And you don't need much surface area for that. So I think the dams are safe. I think it's just downstream. It's going to be quite difficult for all the folk, especially folk without means, for the next week.
I mean, what that means is that there are difficult decisions to make about opening sluice gates. But if I was managing a dam, you probably don't have much choice. You have to open it. You have to relieve some of the pressure. If you don't, it's just going to overflow anyway, and you'd have the same result.
Yes, and you can't put the structure at risk. So, it's a matter of managing the consequences, further down. So, a lot of our dams are quite old, and we just have to hope that the structural part of it has been kept, under check and the likes. And I do know there's been a lot of activity over the last couple of years there. So there's no indication that's necessarily, an issue. The problem is informal settlements, and also it's our water infrastructure that is being swept away. And that's going to cost money. But I mean, the national fiscus does budget for these traumatic events. And, I think we're going to run into eThekwini itself, into the hundreds of millions of rands just on the bulk water side. So I don't think funding is going to be the issue. It's going to be access and mobilizing. And I think we will have stock of the items. But it's how do we look after all these poor people who are being washed away at the moment, and whose houses have been washed away, and whose livelihoods depend on trading and all the likes. So I think, the social issues are quite dire at the moment.
The other issue is you talk about the fact that we have the parts, we have the spares in the country. This is all going to be done on an emergency basis. Unfortunately, and I hate to bring this up at this time, but I think I must, the pandemic procurement was also, for PPEs, was also done on an emergency basis. And we remember what happened there when Treasury relaxed some of the controls. Do we need to be really quite careful? We need to do this on an emergency basis. We need to do it quickly. We also need to do it very, very well.
Yes, and I would suggest that government involves the private sector and NGOs and some labour organisations to oversee the process, so that we have the least possible sticky fingers, in there, because emergency rules are there to unlock things quickly. But then, yes, we get people who abuse it. I think hopefully we've learned our lesson in the pandemic, And I would just urge government to just involve the private sector to do this. I see with the port issue, the private sector was heavily involved also. So I think there's a better chance to make sure that it is transparent as we can get. Yeah.
You talk about how long it's going to take to actually get proper bulk water supplies into really large urban areas. These are very difficult. Their water tankers may be. A lot of people are going to want to boil their own water. They may be able to find rainwater. They may have some in a Jojo tank. Their neighbour may. Is it safe to do that, to take rainwater and just simply boil it?
Generally speaking, it is. Generally speaking, it is. And we can say a lot of the rainwater, especially the latter part of it, would be cleaner. You know, the first rain would be a bit dirtier because you're scrubbing all of the, let's say, the gases, the pollution from cars and the likes. But I think this water would be better. But, you know, we have to be careful. You have to boil, let it settle first and then let it boil. You know, a dash of chlorine into your Jojo tank, or put some chlorine pills in there. You know, just it doesn't taste nice. Don't put too much, but just make sure that you have enough, you know, in interim. Yeah. So and you know, I think as emergency repairs are done to roads, the tankers will be able to access, you know, more people.
Benoit le Roy, thank you very much indeed, CEO of the SA Water Chamber. Such a difficult situation that is now developing in KwaZulu-Natal. The long-term impacts of this are going to be felt for some time. Benoit, thanks very much indeed. So.